first.
Okay, yes, absolutely. So, my name is Ruth Cooper-Dickson. I'm almost 45. I'm the eldest of five siblings, and come from a very loud, extrovert family. Part of my family are military as well, so there's kind of that toughness and resilience we've always kind of, I guess, had instilled in us. Um, I also went through something quite traumatic as a young child. I lost my father in a car accident when I was 6. So the reason I start here is because I suppose there's quite a bit there around childhood trauma, especially with anxiety and kind of then dealing with that. And I have, quite a few memories around that. But then also, I suppose, how I spent a lot of my time growing up, sort of trying to fit. It felt like I was always trying to fit in. I often remember, I've got kind of very clear memories that have come up since I have been diagnosed, where I was told I was too much, not actually by my immediate family. I mean, there was always jokes about Ruth will talk all the time, but at school, around other people, trying to contain it, especially as a young girl back then, several decades ago, where you were expected to be seen, not heard, and just be fit into the good girl mold. And I always felt like that was a big part of me that it was really weird, because I had a part of me that was really extrovert, but a part that was quite introverted as well, and just couldn't really kind of align the two.
Yeah.
And I had real trouble with authority. So I think I found I was very smart at school, very street smart. I mean, I used to hang out with a lot of the wrong crowd, but stayed on track. And there was no concern because my grades were always good, but I rebelled a lot at school. I rebelled a lot about, I put my parents, I think, through hell quite a bit, and went off to university the first time and dropped out after 3 months and came home and ended up working in the corporate world at 19. And I think for me that was like really interesting, because my first 4 years I actually worked in aerospace, believe it or not, and I loved like working on projects. I loved the autonomy, and obviously not knowing anything about sort of neurodivergence then, but that was, and I moved roles every year because I was project based. I went to university one day a week. My organisation put me through my degree back then, which was quite unheard of. It would be unheard of now. So they sponsored my degree fully to do that with no questions. And I had a real variety in my day, but with some structure. And I really remember thriving in that environment. And then over the years, I went overseas, I travelled a lot. I've always felt a bit, I was told once by someone, oh, you're quite flighty. And that's one of those stinging comments that I remember I've locked away. But I've always found it quite hard to settle. I've travelled a lot, I've lived overseas a lot, all around the world, South America, Asia, Australia, in and out of London, and ended up being in the corporate world for quite some time. And I used to always have panic attacks. So they actually started when I was at work, when I was 19. And I have a real feeling that they started in meetings, in meeting scenarios. And now I know what I know about me with my neurodivergence. I think, again, it was that expectation of containment, that you're in a meeting room and all these people are there and you can't move and you can't get up and you can't stand up and move around, you can't fidget, you can't come out with ridiculous things. And if people are staring at you and observing you, and I think there was this whole thing around meetings that just I really struggled with, and started having panic attacks, and then they just came into all parts of my life. And for years I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell anybody about them, and dealt with them, locking them away. And eventually, fast forward 8 years ago, I was going through a lived experience of divorce, relationship breakup, and wasn't coping with that. Again, putting on a brave face, but burnout. I found burnout, looking back as well in hindsight, burnout was quite a significant factor in my career in the corporate world. I definitely always hit, and this is before we knew burnout was a thing, but I see these patterns now looking back. Like I was working in investment banking and wealth management for a period of time, and absolutely crashed and then went off to train to be a fitness instructor. Like, it was just real kind of, oh, this is the new shiny thing I'm going to go off and do, and hyper focus and be all in it and get to be the best fitness instructor in the world. And I had this huge breakdown for 8 years ago, and that was when I was diagnosed with panic disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, which made sense completely about panic attacks, especially those panic attacks that happened with no rhyme or reason. But then it's only been in the last 8 years, and then especially with lockdown, where I really I realized there was other stuff going off that I still hadn't kind of navigated or kind of got in touch with it. And now so the last 8 years, it put me on the trajectory where I am now, which is a positive psychology practitioner, as like typical ADHD. Went all in, retrained, got an MSc, casual, published award-winning academic, just the usual kind of just throwing myself in there. And we work mostly with global corporates in my main business, and I do other bits and I wear other hats, but helping people in the workplace from a mental health well-being, but also an inclusion perspective is, I guess, what I've always been about. I look back, my very first degree in aerospace was actually on engineer, and my thesis dissertation back then was on engineering a female profession, because I didn't see any female engineers back then in the 90s and the early 2000s on the shop floor, and women that I was working with, it was all men. And I've always had that real importance. I spent time in inclusion as well, as an inclusion consultancy. I mean, the reason I suppose I start with all of that stuff is just to give you a little idea probably where I'm coming from, but also it really shows like my ADHD, the kind of looking at all different things, trying different things, being really good at different things, and also just really struggling with some of those more negative aspects of being neurodivergent, or not being neurotypical and not fitting into those molds, I suppose. So that was a very long introduction, I'm sure, but hopefully it's given you loads of insight.
Do you know what? It's funny when you say, just to let you know where I'm coming from. I knew where you was coming from the get-go, because you were speaking and I'm nodding along, because pretty much everything you covered, other than actually managing to get the degree. I did do the whole went to uni but then dropped out, but what you did, like learning on the job and kind of like the way you've approached your degree, would probably be the only way I would get one. But as you say, it's unheard of. But everything else made perfect sense. Even being like the extrovert but also an introvert, I always find it depends on the environment. Or I always joke and say, even as an adult, I always joke and say, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, because I've had every career you can think of. I've been a teacher, I've worked in corporate, I worked for the police, I've been a business owner, a charity founder. I think I'm finally in a job role where I actually feel, oh my God, I finally found what I wanted, because I never thought I would. But it all makes perfect sense, and my journey has been very, very similar. Like suddenly having those dopamine hits when you're, deep diving into your new passion. And I always, my shed's like Aladdin's cave. There's so many like unfinished business and these amazing ideas that I was so passionate about, and you kind of like get really excited, and then something shiny comes and takes your attention, and off you go. But even down to the always being described as, intelligent, and managing to maintain those amazing grades, even if, I had the worst attendance in my whole year, but still managed to be in the top classes and pass without revising, because revising is alien to me. It takes too much structure. But I still managed to know the information. It's weird. But again, it comes from that just kind of, I always say it's like common sense, but it isn't common sense. It's our common sense. But everything you said, all of it I could relate to. Yeah. And it's...
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it's crazy that I have these conversations with other people who are neurodivergent, usually women with ADHD, and when we speak, it's like, if you know, and no one else really gets it, especially when you started off and said, was always the extrovert, but also really socially awkward. Even like the hiding the panic attacks. I get anxiety attacks because I've got social anxiety as well. but you would never know it. I could be amongst everyone and inside I'm literally just having the worst time, but I hide it because we've been taught the resilience of just getting on with it. So I get you.
I thank you. And it's funny, isn't it? Because this year, I was diagnosed end of last year. So it was about 5 or 6 years ago, before the lockdown started, before the pandemic. So it would have been maybe 4 years ago or so, 4 or 5. And I've got a really good friend who is autistic and ADHD, and who was misdiagnosed actually with bipolar disorder for a long time. I said to her, I think I might be ADHD. And she just laughed and went, yes, you are. Like, that just kind of blended. And I was like, I said, do you think I should get a diagnosis? And she said, well, does it going to make any difference? And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe not. And then I think when the pandemic hit, I realised actually how much I enjoyed, even as an extrovert, but I enjoy being introverted and having that energy and time to myself. And my boundaries just became so much stronger around that. And when the lockdowns lifted and life returned to normal, I really wanted to make that conscious effort to keep that balance. But I did find with work particularly, and running a business, that I was running a business in almost like trying to run a business in a neurotypical way, which is why I kept getting burnt out when it came to hitting targets or going because I would just literally try and get that one target, and with everything else going to pot, and also not coping well with realizing it now, but not coping well with like managing a team or having to have a structure around team meetings and things like that, which the freedom of just being able to collaborate when I want to, or not having to worry about having a team, or not thinking I've got to do all of these things. And it came to the point of end of last year when I was so basically back in 2021 I was like, right, I'm going to scale the business, my main business, that's what I'm going to do. And I did that for a whole year last year, and it made me so desperately miserable, and I was becoming burnt out regularly. And at the end of October, I'd come back from a great speaking engagement in Amsterdam. I was flown out for World Mental Health Day to this sports brand and did this great talk, and I came back and I was just in pieces. And I just thought, do you know what? I just something in me was like, this is ADHD related, I'm sure, and I need to just look at this and get a diagnosis to be able to get a sense of, okay, well, what does this mean if it is true, and like, how can I navigate that? And so I did all that, and went privately, did it in a couple of months, and received the psychologist on the call and the interview was like, I'm going to tell you now, yes, you are ADHD, hyperactivity, impulsivity, so this is kind of like your journey now to navigate. And I spent most of January and February of this year in real grief part of like Ruth, that really, I mean, I was really lucky because I did go to a really liberal hippie secondary school, which is really interesting. My brothers and sisters, my brother next down to me didn't cut it at all, and my 3 youngest were sent to other schools. But I think I thrived in that environment because there wasn't as much structure as there would have been in perhaps a more formal state school.
Yeah.
We called the teachers by the first name, we could swear, we could walk on and off campus, which back in the 90s that was very kind of liberal. But I think it worked so well, and I had some amazing teachers, because I guess the ethos of the school, who would say, I would come in, get the work and walk out. And then I always remember some of the lads in my business class would say, well, how can Ruth leave? And I remember this teacher, Steve Davis, he'd be like, because Ruth will do the work. Like, she may not be here, but she'll do the work and she'll get the grade. So when you do the work and get the grade, you can come and go as you please. And I think it was that being treated like an adult. Do you know what I mean? I think it was teachers that trusted me, because I did. And looking back, which is really, you think now, wow, I guess it works, and no one really picked up on it. But I'd go home and I'd do my work between like 3 and 6. I'd get all my work done in that sort of power hours, and then I'd be done. Like, I wouldn't need to spend all day at school. Was just for hanging out and having a laugh and
if you need that time away, I wish your school sounds great. I went to a school that was before, back in the day when there was like grammar schools. So my school was a grammar school. Oh, wow. And so it was very regimented, very boring. there was no real, like, even like with the creativity, you know, things like the art and stuff, there was none of that. It was science, maths, English were like the main focus. And yeah, I did not thrive in that environment. And I just remember teachers always saying, oh, you're so intelligent and you've got so much potential, if only you would apply yourself. And I would hear that every single day, and yet nobody ever picked up on anything. And I just ended up just not going in, because it was just too much. The environment didn't work. So yeah, it's nice to hear a positive side of, even though obviously we weren't, you know, our additional needs weren't picked up on. I always, so you know, we said about the grief. I was diagnosed back in 2019, right, just in December, so just before lockdown. And I went through a really long time of feeling failed by the system, and like I was let down, and oh, what if I was diagnosed? Where would I be now if I had that support? But recently I've tried to change my mind, because I always believe in a positive attitude really does help with my mental health. And so the way I see it now is, I'm a really resilient person. I do have a lot of skills, even if I haven't mastered a specific one. I've got loads of skills in different areas, and I'm someone who manages to go through life and manage quite well, even though, you know, I've been through quite a lot and that kind of stuff. And would I be as resilient, or would I have, you know, started depending on certain things if I did have so much? You know what I mean? I feel like it builds, it's built character. I do feel like there should be more support, and it is a shame that so many have been failed and haven't had that positive outcome. But, you know, just trying to always think of the positives and not focus on the negatives, I guess.
Yeah, and I think there's something about, I always remember reading a quote, I think it's by Steve Jobs, which is, when you look back on your life, you're able to see the dots and connect them to make sense of where you are. So I think for me, I look at my time in aerospace, which was projects, and that clearly worked for me. And then in an organisation, and then when I went to investment banking, wealth management, I was also working in projects. So that was there was structure, but no day was the same. I was largely getting on with my own work. I was working on my own as well as within a team. And then it was really interesting, because then the minute that they tried to move me into the HR function, because we had this big restructure, I really struggled with a 9 to 5. And I look at the jobs where I worked in talent and recruitment. So there's always been a thread of people to everything that I've done. Like the projects I did in aerospace and also in banking were, always were change projects that involved people, whether that was bringing people in or sadly making people redundant. But there was always an element of people or training or learning and development. But the minute I tried to sit into a 9 to 5 job, that this is what you were going to do, that's when I really struggled. And I blame myself. You know, I think I really gave myself a hard time why I couldn't fit in, and these jobs that. And I remember always thinking, why didn't I want to be like a teacher or a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer or something that was kind of very set? And actually, I just thought, well, that probably wouldn't have been me. Like now, no. I love, like, the last 8 years is the longest job that I've ever had, and I love it because it is, I can try different things or add new skills. So, I recently trained to be a breathwork instructor, and breathwork's completely changed my nervous system and helped me with my anxiety and just calmness. But that was, now it's a skill I can offer. It's a different element, so it's always changing, and I love that. I think that's the empowerment of it. So
I was going to say, when you spoke about your previous careers and the areas where you did thrive, and you were speaking about the constant changing, I know even for myself that it sounds like a dream. It's the variety. Our brains need something new. I joked on Sunday and said, I need a new project, because I'm happiest when I'm working on something new, creating something new. My brain just absolutely loves it when I'm deep diving into that creative side and the design and learning, but it has to be my kind of learning with the creative. Do you know what I mean? So it does make sense. I always feel like with those certain corporate environments, there are roles where we do thrive. We aren't going to thrive in all of them. For example, the standard 9 to 5 in an office with the mundane every day. I mean, I was probably at my lowest mentally when I was in that corporate environment. And at the time, I didn't know why. I was like, something's wrong with me. Why am I so sad all the time? it was that. And yet I'm happiest when I'm thinking and creative. It's why I've had so many businesses, because I just love the actual creating of the idea. But then when you get to the actual everyday of running it, that's when I fail. So it does make perfect sense. But what I wanted to ask you actually is probably a selfish question, but what I also think others watching will find really useful is, with running your own business, I noticed you mentioned that, you know, you found your way of doing it, which isn't necessarily the norm. What is it? What is the secret recipe that some of us are, you know, haven't found yet?
So I think there's something about so first of all, that there's a part about, for me, around timing when I work, and when I work is in time of day, but also the days. So I'm an early bird. I'd rather work at 4 or 5 in the morning. I'm not very good in the evening. I also like to work on a Sunday. So there was a whole guilt, I think, about, well, even though it's my own business, if I don't work on a Wednesday, then, because I'm going to probably work on Sunday, then that you should be working. So I think there was this idea around the structure of, this is what a business should look like. And so that was a huge shift. Having a smaller team has helped massively. So I have an assistant, and I definitely need that sense check support, the right hand person. But also, they know, for example, if I don't want to do a team meeting at 9 on a Monday, we'll just move it. Like, there's no hard rules around, we've definitely got to meet at this time every single week, and that works for them as well. So that makes it a bit more flexible. So there's more flexibility there. There's more focus around, like, how I set up my diary. So yesterday I hadn't got anything in my diary apart from a call at 4:45 and in the afternoon. Now I then tend to then go into, oh my goodness, I've got nothing all day, and I won't do anything until I've got that call. So I'll be completely unproductive because I'm just thinking about that one call.
Yeah.
So actually yesterday, me and my assistant worked both on Zoom together for the day, even though we were doing different things, but it kept me motivated. So it helped me just to be in work mode, and we talked through bits and pieces and stuff, but it just was, that helped massively. And also, I've just removed targets. I used to set myself, this is what you've got to make this month, this is what we're aiming for the year, this is what we're aiming for this, and I've removed targets and actually gone on, how do I want to feel? And that has had a huge shift. So last month, for example, it's my sorry, not last month, because we're July now. May is my busiest month. It always has been, because it's Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK. It's Mental Health Awareness Month in the US, but generally it's a big month. I mean, in 7 working days, I did 12 workshops, webinars, keynotes, delivery. Like, I was just out there doing so much, and that was just those 7 days. The rest of it around it was full from the start to finish of May. And I worked with my coach on, who's an ADHD coach as well, but I worked with her on in April, rather than having, like you talked about mindset, which I think is so important. As a positive psychology practitioner, it's so important to note that. But how do I want to feel at the end of May? And we really worked on, of course, I'm going to be tired. I'm going to be talking about, and because the theme was anxiety in the UK, I was doing lots of more lived experience talks, which I wouldn't usually do. I tend to keep some of that stuff, as you know, you can't, the more, even with a reauthoring and then a narrative, constantly talking about your own traumas, you appreciate, I mean, it brings it up front of mind, then after a while you're just living the same thing over and over again, which doesn't help the brain. So I knew that was going to be hard. I knew I was on my own with my assistant, but we were going to be doing it. There was so many great, every day was a great day, you know, there was so much energy, and I was having to bring that energy. So we worked on, with my coach, how do I want to feel? And I wanted to feel like I might be exhausted, but I'm going to be so bloody proud and pleased. Yeah. So it's okay to feel a good exhausted, because this is on my terms. And then I was going off for 2 weeks on holiday. So that was kind of the acknowledgement of how I'd be tired, but it'd be a good tired, and it's on my terms. The second thing was, how was I going to put in micro self-care. So I might not be able to do the gym or run every single day or do whatever it is, but can I just do 10 minutes of yoga before I go to bed? Can I sit outside when I'm in London between sessions, sit somewhere if it's nice outside and just switch off and eat my sandwich or salad or wherever, just have some and every day had to really be conscious about self-care. And I finished that month and smashed it and went away and had a great time, but I wasn't in my head. I'd be like, I'd already depicted myself as, you're going to be broken, you're going to be on your knees, you're going to be, and I was like, yeah, I was tired, of course, but it was a good tired.
It was a good tired. I love a good tired. I get that. Yeah. So I push and push myself, but you kind of get that, oh my God, I'm exhausted, but I did amazing. And that's one of my favourite feelings, to be honest. Even when I'm really exhausted, that's probably when I'm happiest. It's really weird, but yeah.
And just knowing how to top that up as you go along. So, okay, you're not completely depleting the tanks, but also knowing that I had a beautiful, 10, 15 days off work, wherever it was. But then I could just completely decompress and recharge. And then I've come back and I've had another couple of months. And at the end of this month, I'm taking August off. And I've never done that before, even though generally we're a very quiet business in August because training doesn't happen and people are away.
Yeah,
we've always kept the doors open. And actually I said this year, I was like, no, I'm going to close the doors, we'll monitor emails, but we've already said to clients, we're not around, we're not having meetings, we're not having delivery. The only thing I will do is my coaching commitments, which will be ad hoc, and there there's a handful of those peppered in, but largely it's my time. So if I want to write, if I want to be creative, all the good stuff, I want to start like you, get that, let me spend some time on Headspace and these core projects, but there's no expectation from anyone else or on myself. So yeah,
don't you think that really helps though? When I always find that when you don't make that decision and just say, do you know what, this is what's going to happen, it kind of lingers there and it's always there until you make that decision. But when you just say, do you know what, actually, I am going to take August off. Once you've kind of set it in stone, it relieves so much pressure. And sometimes it literally is just taking that step and saying, no, this is what's going to happen. Because then it isn't just constantly kind of in the back of your mind, waiting to just eat its way at you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And the interesting thing is, we're not far. Last year was a weird, like lots of small businesses, and especially with the work that because we work with corporates as well, because of cost of living and inflation, interest rates, budgets, everything was in a really weird place last year. And actually I also think because of the pandemic in the mental health and wellbeing space, lots of corporates, leaders were saying, we did mental health and well-being during the lockdowns. So last year was a bit of a weird
now.
Something else now. What's the new flavour of the month? So there was a lot of that last year, but I checked our figures yesterday and I'm almost like where we were for a whole financial year last year as an entirety. We've still got another 3 months left, 4 months left, 3.5 months left, and I'm like, this is what we can't with no team. And I'm like, and I'm not on my knees, and I'm loving it, and I'm doing the work that I love to do, and it's filling me up. And obviously clients are loving it. I'm turning up energized and bringing my best self. I'm bringing that expertise. Loving every week's different at the moment, different trainings, different sessions.
Perfect for an ADHD brain.
It's just like I don't know. It makes sense to structure your business in a way that works for you as someone who's neurodivergent, which I'd never heard of before until this year. It never crossed my mind at all.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense, because even the way that I myself am happier at the moment, I've noticed it's because I've taken away certain pressures. So with the struggling and panicking about being places for a certain time or working within a certain hours, and I feel sorry for the rest of the team because they do get lots of messages. I kind of laughed to myself earlier when you said about the Sunday. They will get messages for me on a Sunday, or unlike you with being an early bird, so I'm an early bird, but I also like working late at night as well. But during the day I'll have times when I need downtime, so they may send me an email and get a response at 2 a.m. or at 5 a.m. when I wake up. But they know that's how I work. They know that I will produce the work and more. So with that mutual understanding, whereas before it was the regimented 9 till 5, that is it. And I do find that the flexibility that you give to yourself and take away, it's not even the outside world, it's the pressure we put on ourselves, I find, that gives us those anxieties. But when you just make that mental like decision of actually no, it's okay to, even down to something I always say is, I am happy knowing that I'm giving my best, even though my best is different on different days. Some days I'm superwoman, some days I can only manage an hour, other days I can't function at all. But as long as I give it my best and you kind of take away that pressure, I'm noticing that my best is up there a lot more, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I just feel like our brains are just so...
Well, I just had a realisation yesterday, because I ended up doing... I'm doing a trail 10k race this Saturday, because I'm a big runner, and I didn't manage to get out at the weekend because I'd been at the gym instead, and so I wanted, yesterday morning I felt really good, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to take longer, and you know, ended up doing an 8k trail round near where I live. And by the time I got back, and then so that was quite early, I'd walked the dog as well, and then I was in the kitchen, and before I started doing my yoga, I was like on Instagram, loading the post on my personal brand account, putting in the text, reposting something from LinkedIn from a client posted a couple of weeks ago that needed to go on, and bits and pieces. And then I messaged my assistant and I said, oh, I'm really sorry, I'm running behind, because we were catching up at 8:30, and I said I'll be online by 9, I just need to have a shower and stuff. And anyway, so by the time I sat down and we were talking, I said, but actually I was working, because I was working. What I was doing was loading stuff on socials, but technically that is work. So I was like, I got behind, and I was like, but it wasn't because I was. But it's okay. It didn't. It doesn't matter, because she's not holding me accountable. It's like, where were you? You know, it's fine. I was getting on with the to-do list. Was in Asana anyway. But also, I said to her, but I was actually. This is in the head, because I'm not sat at a desk doing something on a laptop. It feels like this isn't work. I'm like, but that was work. I remember just standing against the sink and loading the post and copying stuff from notes and posting it in. I'm like, but that's my job. Like, because I'm compelled to that, because it's for work and it's a scheduled post, I'm putting it on. And I was like, but so that was a big realization, because that was work. So I have been working this morning. So why am I even apologizing for something?
Yeah. I do notice as well that we constantly are explaining ourselves like, I'm really sorry, and I'm just doing this and I'm just doing that, and others around us are like, it's okay. It's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves, and that, I think, for me personally, has been a game changer with the people I work with as well, because you do get people who they have to be on time, they have to have things set in a certain way, they have to, and that's okay, but it's nice to move away from that and work within environments and with people who let us thrive working in the way that works better for us. And it's life-changing, honestly.
It's been really interesting going into clients this year to deliver workshops or training, particularly where I'll do the opening intro in a session, and I'll always do a very brief, not as long as the intro I did for you. I'd be like, been here half an hour, we've only got 2 hours. I will say to people, especially if we're on a course for say if it's mental health first aid training, which is a couple of days, or tomorrow I'm going into a client to deliver a whole day workshop, I will say at the start, like, if you want to get up, if you want to move around, you need to stretch your legs, stand at the back of the room, do it. I said, I'll say that I'm ADHD, so I'll be jumping around all over the place, I'll be holding on to bits and pieces. I said, so just do what you need to do to enable you to listen and to stay in the space, and whatever way helps you to learn best. And you can see sort of people around the room relaxing into that and thinking, oh good, this is good, because I think that was why I've always been so comfortable being at the front of a room. I've never had a problem with that, and being on stage, as my mum calls it, but just being sitting in a space where, oh my god, I can't move. And I remember as part of my MSc back in 2018, we had this brilliant lecturer who's like a world-renowned academic in the area of my expertise that I study. And she used to run this lecture, and she used to set her phone alarm every 20 minutes, which sounds quite annoying, but every 20 minutes it would go off, but she would get everybody to move and stretch and stand up, and that was like a real shift for me, because after a while it stopped being annoying when it went off, because people would just naturally, oh, I can move now, and you think,
yeah,
that's real. And obviously hers was all about embodiment and well-being at her studies, and it was just, oh, okay, get up and move around. And it's
even just when you say people were relaxing, it sometimes is just the reassurance and not the permission, but letting people know. So I've got 2 children who are both autistic and ADHD, and my son, well, both of them do, but mostly my son, he does modelling. And sometimes, you know, beforehand they'll say, oh, what reasonable adjustments need to be made, etc., etc. And most of the time I just say the most important thing is clear communication and letting him know that he's allowed, because even though I know and he knows, when you're in a new environment, it is literally just someone saying it's okay to go and stim, it's okay to get up and leave if you need to take 5 minutes, because he'll have like a timer that if he's feeling anxious, he will use it. It's a 2-minute sound timer, and within that time it works wonders, and it's like it kind of resets his emotions. But when he's in certain environments, he just needs to kind of have that reassurance and be told, you're allowed to do that here too. Whatever it is you need, if you need to put your ear defenders on, if you need to get up and walk, because he stims, so when he's feeling anxious, sometimes he'll literally just go and like spin in a circle or jump around and flap, and it just makes him feel better. So when he's on set, you'll have the director standing in his spot while he's running around in the background until they need him again. But he needs that, and there's times when he'll go and we'll leave and he'll be really anxious and upset, and it's because he didn't know that he was allowed to do certain things that he needs to. So it does make sense to, even for adults, just having that reassurance, you're allowed to do this, it's okay, you know, we're in a very inclusive environment, and sometimes that's all it takes, literally.
Yeah, and I think it's what also that does for me is that it stops me from feeling, I feel like that I'm showing up as my true self. And I think since the journey of this year, being able to do that means that I'm giving myself permission to just show up in that way, however that comes out. And I think it makes you more, and of course the work I'm doing, it enables people to connect and make them feel more human, you know, themselves. And I've always been very good at that. I mean, that's just a skill that I have, but also just doing it from a place of, from a neurodivergent space, I think just gives those quirks of how we are, and of, you know, the beauty of the difference of just being able to relax into, I'm in this room for an hour, for a day, I can learn, I can do whatever I need to make myself feel comfortable, I think is, and you still don't hear that a lot, right? You
No.
don't, and you don't hear that people would say that on a training course, even. Yeah, people don't share that information. No. They don't say those sorts of things. So, yeah.
No, yeah, definitely. You just said something actually that made me want to ask you. With your diagnosis recently, how did that make you feel? The reason I ask is because you said about you are doing that for yourself and how you feel and so on. What did you find was, you know, the biggest benefits from getting a diagnosis personally?
I read something really interesting, because it was all, you know, there's been all the backlash around, especially in some of the media, about everyone's diagnosed now with ADHD, and of course it's like mental health, right? We didn't talk about mental ill health, let alone 5 years ago. We wouldn't have known the stats, and of course not, because it's more acceptable for people to talk about it. So of course the figures change. This is what I always say to businesses: the minute you start talking about mental health and you create a culture where people feel safe, your HR numbers might take a massive knock, because people will feel comfortable to be off sick. People will feel comfortable to share the real reason they're not in, rather than their sickness rates will go up, because instead of those unexplained absences or people taking holiday when they don't have to, of course, that's what will happen. So I feel that, and I remember seeing this, when it was quoted in an article recently, but someone said the reason people pay to go, you know, the reason people people would spend the money to go private is they've got to be fairly sure if they're going to spend that kind of money that they have a diagnosis, and that was was with me, because I knew there was a huge wait list, and I paid to go private. I had the privilege to be able to, and I get that, but also I thought, well, I was more sure that I wasn't, that it was that clarity. So I think there was that so there was a reassurance there, I think, from the benefit. And then on the back of that, I think enabled me to have some really good conversations with my mum, for example, about what happened to me as a child, and then being at school. And when she was filling out the questionnaire, she was bringing up these memories, and we had some really good chats about that and understanding how I worked. And I think it's just enabled me to look at my life very differently. And I look back to January, and I was saying this, I've been working with this coach since December. I've known her before because she's actually working in the literature space, and I'm assigned to their agency now, which is wonderful. But I've worked with her as a specific ADHD coach since December, so as a personal coach. And she said the change that you've gone through this year, and I sense it myself. Like, we talk about my ribbons flying, because I always talk about seeing all these ribbons of colour, and that's me, and they're not all constrained and having to be plaited and look all nice and neat, and I feel like that's me expressing myself. And I know people that know me know I'm very talkative, very outgoing and extrovert, but I think there's embracing my, I want to say weirdness, but my eccentricity of just being me. I just love it, and I love that, and the benefits of harnessing those superpowers. So knowing the things that work well for me, and then not trying to shoehorn or force the things that don't, and let those go. So if there's something I know I'm not as good at, or something that is not, like you said, the expectation, I'm like, do you know what? I'm too old for this now anyway. I don't even need that. Stop trying to push it.
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. When I was 32, I'm 36 now, when I was diagnosed, and I always felt like I went through life being misunderstood. But it was when I got my ADHD diagnosis that I realised it wasn't just the misunderstanding from the outside, but from myself. So once I got that diagnosis, it's like self-love and appreciation and awareness for myself. More importantly, because I always thought it was kind of like more for the outside, but it was only when I then got the diagnosis that I was like, do you know what? Actually, you are quirky and a little bit peculiar, but it's okay. It gives you that extra bit of flavour. You are late often, but I'm late, but great. When I do turn up, I work faster. My brain works like no one else that I know. And I do bring a lot to the table, and it's okay to have the negatives. Everybody does, even neurotypical people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm probably the happiest I've ever been in my whole life.
Yeah.
And people often say, oh, when you get these kind of diagnoses and stuff, and I'm like, no, I don't need pity. I'm actually really happy. Yes, I'm different, but that's not a bad thing. And it's life-changing. And I do think that when it comes to these diagnoses, especially for, women who are often diagnosed later, it comes with the self-respect and the self-love that we now have for ourselves because of the knowing who we are. And I think that's really important.
Oh, I love everything that you've just said there. I don't want to get myself in I don't think I will get in an emotional state, but I've been going through quite a tough time the last month. I had a relationship breakup, and although that has been incredibly painful and raw, it's really interesting because at the start, one of the conversations I've had with my coach was the fact that I can't break who I am now, because there was a real fear, I think, at the start of this year, having gone through so much change and got myself to this place around, say, March, April time, May, where, like you said, you feel the happiest you've ever felt. And but I think as well for me, I think you've sort of said it, there's that self-love, that self-acceptance. There's a real strength to that and a resilience. And I remember saying, like, what happens before that? I was like, oh, well, what happens if I break this? If I go back to how I was before, or And then I was like, but I can't break it. And then there was a realization around sort of May time that I wasn't going to break this. This is okay. This is me. This is how I've changed. And I look at, and there's probably varying degree, of course. And to be honest, I don't even know some of the ins and outs, as we often don't with these things. But I think I know that I've changed this year. I think I've changed for the better, 100% changed for the better. And change is always good, and people don't always grow with us, do they? And maybe there's been quite a lot of that change there. You know, I'm definitely, that's what I was saying about definitely more calm. Those ribbons are flying, but the ribbons are flying, but my nervous system's massively regulated. I don't have these big highs and big lows. I'm just very, I was talking to a client not long ago who I don't really know that well. I've known her since back end of last year, and she said to me about 2 weeks ago, you're so different. You're still Ruth. You're still, chatty, quirky, all these things. But there's a sense, I can get a sense of underlying calm to you, which and she's only known me, not that long. And interesting, I think we also end up letting go of people, whether that is for our own admission or not. But there's been, even look at people that I've worked very closely with over the years. Some of those have now gone as well. And I don't think people, there's people that are with us for a lifetime, those that are just there for whatever the phrase is, for part of that journey. But I think I've really, apart from the general grief of losing a relationship and that love that disappears, and there's no remedy for a broken heart at times apart from time. But that real sense of self and real sense of self-love and acceptance and that is so strong. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like self-love and self-acceptance in a very unapologetic way, where you're like, this is who I am, and you need to accept that, because I accept who I am now. And whereas before, and you go through those stages where you're constantly thinking, what's wrong with me, and hiding and masking, but it's like with a diagnosis, you are unmasked, and then this is who you are, and it's amazing, and it's life-changing, and it's just really lovely to hear other people who are experiencing it, because we have gone through our whole lives kind of trying to fit into this box because it's the norm, and hiding certain things, even down to when you said earlier about when you start to think back, and suddenly all these new memories come, and there's so many little things I did as a kid where to me it was just normal because you don't know any different. There was times when I'm, again, the extroverted introvert, where I would hide under a table because the anxiety of speaking to someone new in an environment that was unfamiliar literally made me want to throw up. But also being the loudest and most outgoing person in the room, it doesn't make sense, but to me it did, because this is all I know. And now you kind of look back and you're like, oh, okay, it was okay.
My mum has a really good memory of me, she says, which she hadn't thought of until she was doing the questionnaire. And she says, I remember this memory of you being about 3 years old, just before my brother was born. She says, I lost you in a baby shop, in one of the baby shop chains. I couldn't find you. I was like panicking, like, where are you? And I eventually found you, and you were literally sat there holding court with about, I don't know, 5 or 6 women around you, explaining how a breast pump worked at 3 years old and demonstrating it. And that's why I was like, oh my God, what is this shit? Who is this child?
So we're just so independent.
And then the other times, that what you said about hiding under the table, I've got a really clear memory of having some family over who I didn't really know, family friends, and being so frightened about coming downstairs. And I remember staying up there and that really sticks in my mind, because the longer it went on, the longer I didn't want to go downstairs. And I remember my family coming up and trying to bring me down, and I was just screaming and hating it. And
it's like two complete opposite. Even like, so right now, I can sit and talk to you and be so comfortable because, like, I know what I've come for. I've come to have a conversation with you, and I can do it. I run coffee mornings for parent carers where I host, and it sounds quite similar to the work you do, but
Yeah.
I give them techniques on how to manage being a parent carer and trying to give them that positive. But yet a really good friend of mine invites me to her birthday dinner every year, and I go and I sit and I have silent panic attacks throughout, pretend to be sending emails on my phone, and I'm so uncomfortable. And it's like two different people. And I find that that's the case all the time. Sometimes I will be absolutely terrified, but I am a confident person, and I can never make sense of it. But now I just know it's just who I am, and it's okay.
Well, it's really funny that when we start to talk to other people that are neurodivergent, so my assistant has a son who is autistic with an ADHD, and we were talking yesterday about money, and I said, because I told her I went all the way to Yorkshire 2 weekends ago and forgot my bank cards because I'd charging my car and then put the bank cards in the middle compartment, and then my sister-in-law drove us up to Yorkshire, so my car, everything, and I was paying for the hotel, and luckily I got stuff on my, obviously cards on my phone, but also the one I needed was on WhatsApp because I'd sent it to her, and I said, but I don't carry money. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, I don't carry money, I just use cards. And she was saying her son does that because then it's easier to. I don't like interactions in shops, so if I pay on a card, it's just that's. I don't have to. I don't have to do like. I've stopped carrying cash when they stopped using cash in the pandemic. I was like, amazing. I don't have to draw money out, have conversations. I can just tap and go.
The small talk, yeah. I don't like small talk either.
I don't want to go deep and meaningful like this, or not at all. Like
yeah, exactly. And then when someone does try to give me the small talk with the most random conversations that mean nothing to me, I just, I don't like it. But I'm the biggest chatterbox you'll ever meet. Again, it's like these really weird one end or the other and no in between. Yeah. People often say, oh my God, you're so nice. I've seen you so many times and you look so mean and so unapproachable and really like, stuck up or antisocial. And then they'll speak to me and they're like, oh my God, I never would have thought it. But it's because I don't want to have those weird little interactions because they make me feel really uncomfortable. And you kind of wonder why? And now I'm just like, I'm neurodivergent. It's just who I am. I'm not going to worry about it anymore.
Well, that's really interesting because I've heard that before from other people. They're having that similar conversation, and I've definitely, I get, oh, you're so intimidating, or you come across as so intimidating when you get to know you're not. But I think that, again, there's this extrovert, there's this mask that I put on where a lot of the time I'll just be so focused on what I need to do that it obviously looks like I'm just being in control or just focused, but I'm just hyper focused on, right, I'm walking into this room, I need to feel like I'm in control, so I'll just kind of mask some of that, and then it ends up coming across as like I'm being all like, intimidating, and someone's, oh, you're actually really nice and kind, and I'm like, well, I am, but it's just, I must obviously do it as part of my masking as well. It's just to give out the sense of I know what I'm doing. Like,
not just that, but I also think because of the late diagnosis, we tend to mask subconsciously without realising until afterwards. But because it's so natural, there's times when I don't want to mask, I just do.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
But also, because our brains are so busy, sometimes I'll be amongst people and I won't interact, or I'll forget to say hi, or I won't make eye contact. But it's because I'm focusing on so much other things that that little piece of information just didn't occur to me. Sorry, I'm so sorry. And I'll leave after and I'll say, oh, did I remember to say goodbye? I can't remember because I've had my brain's just non-stop.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, like the not being apologetic. So I know with my assistant now, I will also be there's times when I'll just be not chatty, I'll just be very, very direct, and I've learned that's okay if it's taken in the right way, and also that's not a bad thing if I'm not being snappy or it's not about them, because I would say if it was about them. So it's just all, and I think because this person is does have experience of a child with neurodivergence, they get it, they know it's not about them, or they understand that it's just me being, if I'm in that headspace of being hyper focused, it'll just be, have you done this, where's this, where's this, can you get this off to so and so, can I have that file, there's probably about 15 things that comes this person.
Yeah.
And then I'll be, but other times I'll be, hi, you're right,
yeah.
Let's not
we have our moments.
Yeah, last Wednesday I just said I can't talk today, and that was okay. Like I'm off the grid, I can't talk today. Because I've got stuff going off, but also just needed that headspace, and that's okay. And that's what I think that would be so much harder. It shouldn't be, but I think in lots of organisations that would be so much harder to be able to explain to your boss or your colleagues that I need a day off the grid today. We need to get to that place, but
down days are very important. I learned that actually when I was doing a parenting course for my son, is that we have days where we're like literally superhuman, but then we have other days where we do need to regulate, and sometimes I'm mute and I'm unable to speak, and I'll literally just need to lay in a dark room with a blanket and please don't talk to me. But then most of the time I get on great. But I think that's also where we get the link and the misdiagnosis with like things like bipolar, which it was suggested is because we have the high highs, but we also have the low lows, and it's usually just us trying to recover. So now allowing ourselves to recover means we do quicker. So we've kind of done that ADHD thing where we go around in a big circle and we talk about any and everything. But I mean, for you personally, if you was to give advice to someone who was, especially like, you know, those who are late diagnosed like us, what would you give advice wise in, like, you know, those tips that have really helped you? I know we've covered a few, but if there's any that we've missed.
I think there's three things. One is to really focus, as you said, I learned it as intentional rest. So learning to factor in that recharge, especially from an ADHD perspective of hyper-focus, hyperactivity. So knowing where that intentional rest is, so you're not doing anything, you're just spending time regulating your nervous system is really important. Knowing how to self-soothe and to care for yourself, and how that can look different at different times, but knowing those tools and techniques that work for you. Reading as much information, listening to podcasts, listening to different people talk, and picking up those nuggets. I think that's been really helpful for me to understand more. And there's some things that I think, oh, that's not for me, or that doesn't work, but there's lots of things where I'm like, wow, that's really helped, or that's really explaining things. I think we can always learn more. So definitely dive into whatever floats your boat in terms of like learning styles, and just dip into different things. And the last thing is, if you are a business owner, or if you're, you know, self-employed, is really think about your own, if you are finding those cycles of burnout and where you're not happy and miserable, like actually looking at, you know, and maybe having an ADHD coach or somebody who's neurodivergent, a coach who can really work with you on what does your business look like for you, if not as a neurotypical person. So are you structuring your business in the right way, or your freelance work, or even in the workplace? Like, how can you get some like focus on your job in a way that enables you to show up as your best self? So they would be my tips.
I like that last one especially. That's one I'm definitely going to take away with me personally. Trying to be the entrepreneur, business woman, and then everything else in between. But that's really, really handy. Thank you. I think it's really interesting as well, because with combined diagnosis, obviously you then present differently in different ways, and I think that's probably why I sometimes will be a bit different, because of the other diagnosis that I have. But there's just so much that we will naturally relate to. So it's really interesting.
No,
and it's really nice to... No, I was going to say, it's really nice to speak to someone who is doing it, who has their business and is thriving, because it's very inspiring to those of us who struggle in those areas, you know, to see an example that we can do it. We just have to navigate and find our way. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I've loved our chat. It's flown by as I expected it would do.